In this unit, we're going to cover federal laws. In addition to all the Texas laws that affect the operation of your dealership, you must also adhere to several federal laws. Every Texas dealership must follow these strict federal operating guidelines or face the possibility of extensive federal fines. So in this unit, we're going to cover the Federal Trade Commission Buyer's Guide Law, the Federal Trade Commission Red Flags Rule, the Driver Privacy Protection Act, the Uniform Commercial Code, the United States Patriot Act, the Office of Foreign Asset Control, the National Motor Vehicle Title Information System, and also the United States Treasury cash reporting requirements. The Federal Trade Commission Buyer's Guide Law. Up until a few years ago, our automobile industry was really racked with fraud and deception. A long time ago, many unethical dealers operated dealerships with the sole intent of defrauding the customer. Well, things have changed dramatically since then. Now, both the federal government and the Texas Department of Motor Vehicles require dealerships to operate with the highest ethical standards possible. After countless fraudulent dealer transactions had been reported to the federal government, the Federal Trade Commission, which protects consumers against fraudulent businesses, created a new law called the Federal Trade Commission Buyer's Guide Law. The Federal Trade Commission Buyer's Guide Law requires every dealership in the United States to disclose whether or not they offer a warranty on most vehicles they sell. This information must be disclosed before the test drive. I want to repeat that. This information must be disclosed before the test drive. Buyer guides are only required to be displayed on cars and light trucks with a gross vehicle weight of 8,500 pounds or less. I want to repeat that. Buyer guides are only required to be displayed on cars and light trucks with a gross vehicle weight of 8,500 pounds or less. And here you see a Federal Trade Commission Buyer's Guide form. You want to make sure you're completing this form correctly and in its entirety. You'll also need to make sure that it matches the vehicle upon which you are placing it. At the top, you want to enter the make, model, year, and the exact vehicle identification number of the vehicle that you are placing it upon. So you've always got to make sure that this FTC Buyer's Guide matches the vehicle that you're placing it upon. Let's say, for example, you're selling the vehicle as is, and you're not offering any type of warranty. Well, that's pretty self-explanatory. You will just check the as is, no dealer warranty box since you are not offering any type of warranty. But if you are offering any type of warranty, you must complete the form a little bit differently. First, you're going to select the dealer warranty box. Then you will need to select whether you're offering a full warranty in which you would cover 100% of the parts costs and 100% of the labor costs. Or you might instead choose the limited warranty box and clearly disclose the percentage of the cost of parts and labor that you will cover. That's called a limited warranty. Do not select both the full warranty box and the limited warranty box. Just select either or, not both. Then you'll need to clearly disclose the systems that you are covering and the duration of the coverage. So for this training scenario, let's say you're going to cover the engine and transmission. So you would enter engine and transmission, and it is absolutely imperative that you enter the duration of your coverage. Because if you state that you're covering the engine and the transmission and do not end your coverage, you're giving your customer a non-ending warranty. And the worst case scenario in this situation could be that your customer has problems with the engine or transmission in 4 or 5 years, and you could be financially liable to make significant repairs to the engine and transmission because you did not end your warranty coverage. So always enter the duration of the coverage. For example, maybe 30 days or 1,000 miles, whichever occurs first. If you're selling a newer vehicle, the vehicle could also still have some manufacturer's warranty. So you might want to check with the vehicle manufacturer to see if any warranty remains, and you could select the corresponding manufacturer's warranty boxes as well. On the back of the Federal Trade Commission Buyer's Guide, you will want to enter the contact information for your dealership along with the person the customer should contact for any inquiries, which might be you or possibly a salesperson or maybe a general manager. I also want you to be very aware if the transaction takes place in Spanish, you must provide the customer with a Spanish language buyer's guide. I want to repeat that. If the transaction takes place in Spanish, you must provide the customer with a Spanish language buyer's guide as well. It is very important that you comply with this federal law, and it is enforced by federal agents. You could have a Federal Trade Commission investigator show up at any time at your dealership to ensure that you have the FTC's buyer guides displayed on the vehicles that require them. And as you can see here, the fines for violations can be very, very expensive. They can go up to $41,484 per violation. And I want you to be aware that each vehicle without a buyer's guide counts as a violation. So you can also receive state fines in addition to federal fines. I also recommend at the time of the sale that you have the customer sign a copy, make a copy, and always provide one to the customer. And always remember, one copy of everything will go into your dealer records. So you also need to be aware this is a federal form, and federal law requires federal forms to be kept for at least 5 years. Remember, every Texas dealership must prominently display a Federal Trade Commission buyer's guide on most vehicles that are held for resale. Next, let's talk about the Federal Trade Commission Red Flags Rule. The Federal Trade Commission Red Flags Rule requires any automobile dealer that offers or assists in any type of financing to develop and implement in writing an identity theft prevention program to report any attempts of identity theft. The identity theft prevention program must include reasonable policies and procedures for identifying and preventing identity theft and enable an automobile dealer to identify relevant patterns and practices and specific forms that are red flags of identity theft. Also, to detect red flags that have been incorporated into the program and respond appropriately to any red flags that are detected to prevent and mitigate identity theft. So you'll want to ensure the program is updated periodically to reflect changes in risks from identity theft. To report any identity theft, or if you have any questions, you can actually email redflags@ftc.gov, or you can call 1-877-382-4357. So as stated, you must also have a written policy stating how you report identity theft attempts to the Federal Trade Commission. I mean, you can have a written policy that says something like, ABC Motors reports any attempt of identity theft to the Federal Trade Commission. Just make sure that you put your dealership name in there, obviously, instead of ABC Motors. But, let's talk about this for a moment. What is a red flag of identity theft? Let's just say, for example, you meet someone on your lot and they introduce themselves as Frank Thomas. And you and Frank Thomas have a nice conversation, and then all of a sudden Frank Thomas wants to purchase a vehicle from you. And when you go into your office and ask for Frank Thomas's ID, all of a sudden he pulls out an ID that says Jeffrey Smith on it. Well, think about this. Just a moment ago, that customer told you his name was Frank Thomas, and now he's showing you an identification card that says Jeffrey Smith on it. Well, to me, that would certainly be a red flag of identity theft. So you certainly want to make sure that you report red flags of identity theft to the Federal Trade Commission. And like I said, you must have a written policy. That is part of the law. So I do want you to be aware of that. And by the way, recently the federal government has changed this law, and the federal government requires every automobile dealership in the United States to have a written policy describing how they report red flags of identity theft, or you can be fined $3,500. So, I don't want to scare you on a couple of these policies. I just want you to be really aware that if you just take all the additional steps that are necessary to maintain compliance, when you maintain 100% compliance, you don't pay any fines out of your profits. So always remember, 100% compliance equals 100% profits. The Driver Privacy Protection Act. In June of 2000, the state of Texas became what was known as an opt-in state under the Federal Driver Privacy Protection Act, meaning that all Texas dealers must follow and comply with this law. The Driver Privacy Protection Act is pretty much a common sense law, but what it does is restricts the release of personal information from motor vehicle records. And a person or entity such as a dealer may only access the personal information on a Texas driver record if they're exempt under the Federal Driver Privacy Protection Act, or if they've obtained express consent from the record holder. Businesses cannot request personal information for the purpose of a bulk mailing. So if you ever have a company contact you and wants to buy a list of your customers, you certainly can't do that because your customers are always going to be protected under the Driver Privacy Protection Act. It does allow the release of an individual's personal information, to a government agency or possibly, a Texas circuit court or associate court or, a Texas law enforcement agency. That is obviously allowed. But you want to make sure that you always keep your driver's privacy protected. Basically, you as the owner are usually going to be the only ones that have access to your records, unless, say, for example, a Texas Department of Motor Vehicle enforcement personnel is possibly doing a records inspection or something like that. But just remember, whether you're buying or selling vehicles, all of your customers will basically be drivers. Therefore, all of your driver's privacy is protected under the Federal Driver Privacy Protection Act. The Uniform Commercial Code. The Uniform Commercial Code is a set of uniform merchandise transaction laws that have been adopted by most states. The purpose of the Uniform Commercial Code is to bring a standardized sales process to anyone selling goods, such as a dealer, throughout the United States. The Uniform Commercial Code states that any contract or contract for sale that is in writing, verbally, or spoken is completely enforceable. Okay, so that means if you quote a price on the lot, you don't want to turn around and raise that price once you get into your office, because contracts that are in writing or verbally spoken are enforceable. So, if you tell a customer you'll take a certain price for the vehicle, you cannot change the price of the vehicle when you're closing that transaction. If you state a certain price for a vehicle in writing or verbally, you must not raise the price of the vehicle during negotiations. It must always be sold for the original stated price. The Uniform Commercial Code also requires you to disclose all warranty information in writing and requires you to disclose any mechanical defects that you're aware of, no matter how minor, which is pretty much common sense, and that's the ethical way to do business as well. The Uniform Commercial Code also requires you transfer a vehicle with a good and transferable title. You may not sell a vehicle that is not able to be titled unless you disclose that the vehicle cannot be titled in writing. Full disclosure of the vehicle's non-titling status would definitely need to be signed by all parties involved as well. The Uniform Commercial Code contains over 900 pages of information, and it is well beyond the scope and size of this dealer course. The main goal of the Uniform Commercial Code requires full disclosure of all selling terms in writing before the sale of that vehicle. So, for further information about the Uniform Commercial Code, you can certainly look it up online, or you can certainly consult with your attorney. I want to talk to you about the United States Patriot Act. And I'm sure you've heard of this, and you're probably wondering how the United States Patriot Act will affect the operation of your dealership. Well, more than likely, it probably will not. But you remember the United States Patriot Act was enacted after the September 11, 2001 terrorist act against the United States. And it was implemented to basically deter and prevent acts of terrorism against the United States. So how is it going to affect you operating a dealership? Let's just say, for example, maybe you sold a vehicle to someone a couple of years ago, and now maybe they're a suspected terrorist. This would give any federal law enforcement agency, such as the DEA, the FBI, or the ATF, they would be able to confiscate your files. They would be able to take your desk out of your office and take all of your records and things like that. So always be aware of this, and if for some reason, let's say, for example, an FBI agent comes into your dealership one day, confiscate every single record that you have and every file cabinet and every desk. And then the next day, a Department of Motor Vehicles representative comes in to do a surprise records inspection. I mean, that may be your only excuse not to have your records, but you would always want to have plenty of backups as well. Under the United States Patriot Act, you must be ready to produce any paper or electronic files in your possession that are required in an effort for the federal government to prevent and punish terrorism acts against the United States. The Office of Foreign Asset Control, or OFAC. Next, I want to talk to you about a federal agency that you may have never heard of, which is known as the Office of Foreign Asset Control. The Office of Foreign Asset Control was founded during World War II with the sole intent to ensure that no American businesses were doing any type of business transactions with enemies of the United States. And back in World War II, we had a lot of enemies. I think they wanted to ensure that, say, for example, no American tank manufacturer or plane manufacturer were selling tanks or planes to enemies of the United States. The Office of Foreign Asset Control maintains a database called the Specially Designated Nationals, or SDN database, which contains persons, groups of persons, and businesses that any person in the United States is strictly prohibited from doing business with. Countries on a sanctions list include Burma, Cuba, Iran, North Korea, Somalia, Sudan, South Sudan, Syria, and Ukraine, Russia. Complying with the Office of Foreign Asset Control. During each transaction, you must do a quick search of the Specially Designated Nationals database to ensure the person or the business that you're doing business with is not on the sanctions list. You can quickly conduct that search at the OFAC website, which I'll show you here in just a moment. When you conduct a search, you'll either have a no match, a partial match, or an exact match. And I want to remind you, you are going to be required to run these on every single deal. So first, I want to show you what we call a no match. So I just, as an example, entered the name John Doe and then click search. And down here at the bottom, you're going to see the database results. And as you see in this example, there's absolutely nobody by the name of John Doe in a Specially Designated Nationalist database. This is what we call a no match. So you can go ahead and sell John Doe a vehicle. This is what, like I said, we call a no match. Next, however, I want to show you what is called a partial match. I entered the name Osama, click search, and down here, look at this. There's several partial matches. You have Osama Trading Company Limited, Osama Carry Hafez Trading Establishment, Al Osama Trading Company Limited. These are what we refer to as partial matches, and you're okay to go ahead and sell a vehicle to someone that is a partial match. And finally, however, I want to show you what we refer to as an exact match. There's one name that I thought would be in this database, and today that name still is in that database. So I typed in Osama bin Laden, click search, and look at that. This is what we refer to as an exact match, okay? If you have an exact match, you are strictly prohibited from selling a vehicle to someone that is an exact match, okay? So if the name you're searching has an exact match, you must call OFAC at 1-800-540-6322. And, you know, if you're not able to speak with someone, you can leave a voicemail with your phone number and an email stating it is urgent that your call be returned as soon as possible, okay? All persons and businesses in the United States must comply with OFAC regulations. The fines for violations can be substantial, and criminal penalties for willful violations can include fines of ranging up to $20 million and imprisonment of up to 30 years. You know, I read a case recently about a dealer in Atlanta, Georgia, that sold a vehicle to someone in a Specially Designated Nationalist database and was fined $1.5 million for that one transaction. So, you know, obviously the federal government does not want you selling vehicles to enemies of the federal government. I wanted to show you there real quickly how to do a manual search, but if you do decide to use software programs, most legitimate software programs will actually run your OFAC checks in the background. So do please keep that in mind. But if you just want to do a manual search, obviously you can jump right onto the website there at sanctionsearch.ofac.trez.gov. Remember, we're going to run these on every single customer. You are strictly prohibited from the federal government from selling a vehicle to a person that is an exact match in the Specially Designated Nationalist database. Next, I want to talk to you about the National Motor Vehicle Title Information System. When you're purchasing a vehicle to resell, you want to ensure you are never buying a stolen vehicle. You want to make sure you're never buying a vehicle with an altered VIN. You want to make sure you're not purchasing a vehicle with an undisclosed lien or maybe a vehicle with undisclosed damage history. The National Motor Vehicle Title Information System is a title database that keeps track of title history and provides dealers with very valuable information about a vehicle's condition and the vehicle's history. This system may be of assistance to you when you're researching a vehicle history on a vehicle that you're purchasing or maybe taking in on a trade. The National Motor Vehicle Title Information System allows you to find information on that vehicle's title, the most recent odometer reading, any type of damage history, and in some cases, historical theft data as well. By the way, salvage dealers are required under federal law to file a monthly report with the National Motor Vehicle Title Information System. The National Motor Vehicle Title Information System is actually ran by the United States Department of Justice. It was created by the Anti-Car Theft Act in 1992, and it's not dependent on federal funds. It's funded by user fees, so it is not free. I want you to be aware of that. The National Motor Vehicle Title Information System will show current and previous states of title data, title issue date, as I said, the latest odometer data, theft history data, if any, damage and salvage history data, if any, as well. And normally, it's going to include automobiles, buses, trucks, motorcycles, recreational vehicles, and motorhomes, tractors, and some agricultural vehicles. However, it may not include some commercial vehicles. The information in the title database is very current. And as you can see on your screen, some of the data is updated in real time. Some of that data is updated in 24 hours, and all the data is updated in 30 days or less. I want to show you one of these reports, and I always recommend you run one of these reports when you take a trade-in or purchase a vehicle from an individual. And when you first visit the National Motor Vehicle Title Information System, you can click on the blue Check the History of the Vehicle button. Then you will be able to view the vendors that can allow you access to the title data. And I want to remind you, this is not free. It is supported by user fees. So you can view the vendors that are approved for commercial and consumer users, or you can scroll down a little bit there and you can just view the vendors that are approved for commercial users, such as dealers. You can also scroll down towards the bottom of the page and see a link to several vendors that are approved to sell access to the National Motor Vehicle Title Information System database. So you can choose a vendor and pay for how many reports you want to run. Normally, the more reports you purchase in advance, the cheaper it is. So you might consider purchasing 50 or 100 credits. That way you can use them in the future, which really tends to lower the prices per title inquiry. So normally the first page of a report is going to show you a little bit of the vehicle's history, including where it was manufactured, the type of the vehicle, the engine size, and things like that. But your next page is where you are going to view a lot of great information regarding the vehicle's title history. Normally, at the top of the second page, you will see the last reported mileage. This is great information because this will help you identify odometer fraud on a vehicle that you might be purchasing or taking in as a trade. So now, if this report says the vehicle's odometer mileage was last reported at 20,000 miles, but the odometer on the vehicle is reading 5,000 miles, well, then you will know there is a discrepancy on the mileage, and you would definitely need to step away from that vehicle and probably contact state law enforcement officials as well. But here towards the bottom half of the page, you're going to see some really valuable information regarding the vehicle's history. As you can see, this vehicle has never been salvaged, has never been in a flood, has never had fire damage or hail damage. Look at this next green check. No undisclosed lien. There you've probably had, you're probably going to have more than one customer trading a vehicle, and you'll ask them if they owe any money, and they look you straight in the eye and they say no, and then you find that there's a lien on the vehicle. So unfortunately, some of your customers are not always as honest as you are. Here's some great information. The vehicle has never been junked. The vehicle's never been a logging vehicle. It has not had the engine rebuilt. It hasn't been reported stolen. That's an important one there as well. It's never had the VIN reissued. We want to be aware of VIN fraud. You are looking at a really, really great vehicle report here, another great thing about this, not only are you protecting yourself when you're buying a vehicle to resell or maybe taking your trade, but if you hang on to this really sharp looking multicolor page report, and then when you're selling the vehicle and show it to the customer, you're hopefully going to be able to increase the value on the sell a little bit as well. So I feel like we're protecting ourselves when we're buying a vehicle or taking a trade, but you're also going to be hopefully increasing the value of that vehicle when you're turning around and selling it by hanging on to this sharp looking multicolor page report, which you can hand over to the customer during the negotiation process. Like I said, I always recommend running one of these reports whenever you are taking a trade-in and whenever you are purchasing a vehicle from an individual. You do have some protections at the auctions because normally they will run VINs before a vehicle runs through the auction lane. So, you will probably never purchase a stolen vehicle from an auction that was, you'll probably never purchase a vehicle from an auction that was stolen. So keep that in mind. But you could purchase a vehicle that was stolen from Joe Bob on your lot that seemed like the nicest guy in the world until you just found out that vehicle was stolen out of Miami a couple of weeks ago or something like that. As stated, there is a fee to use this system, and the information can be assessed by several third-party vendors that you see on the front page of the website. So remember, just go to the National Motor Vehicle Title Information System at vehiclehistory.gov. United States Treasury cash reporting requirements. Any person in the course of a business that receives more than $10,000 in cash or one or two more related transactions must file IRS Form 8300. Any transaction that is one of a series of connected transactions must be reported as well. So this is what I mean by this. If someone purchases a vehicle from you and they pay more than $10,000 in cash, we're going to have to report that to the IRS within 15 days. I want to repeat that. If somebody purchases a vehicle from you with more than $10,000 in cash, you're going to have to report it to the IRS within 15 days. There on your screen, you're also going to report any combination of cashier's check, money order, bank draft, or traveler's checks that total more than $10,000. And I'll explain that one very easily here in just a second. Cash does not include a personal check, drawn on the customer's own account, regardless of the amount, or say, a cashier's check if it constitutes a loan, okay? But what you're going to report is anytime somebody pays for a vehicle with more than $10,000 or cash, or let's take a look at that next one again. Any combination of cashier's check, money order, bank draft, or traveler's checks that total more than $10,000. Let's talk about this for a moment. You're probably aware a verified payment is a cashier's check, money order, bank draft, or traveler's check. In order for your customer to get a verified payment, more than likely they'll have to go into a financial institute, such as a bank or a credit union. If your customer brings in just one verified payment, there's no red flags there. But let's say your customer brings in two or more verified payments that total more than $10,000, then they have went to multiple financial institutes that day to get multiple verified payments, and that throws up some red flags with the IRS. Let me give you an example that will really easily explain this scenario. Let's say you've sold a $12,000 car on your lot. And let's say the customer just brings in one verified payment. Let's say they pay you with a $12,000 cashier's check. Okay, that's one verified payment. There's no red flags there. But let's say you sell that $12,000 car and your customer brings in one cashier's check for $8,000 and one money order for $4,000. That means more than likely they have probably went to multiple financial institutes that day to get multiple verified payments. And that does throw up just a couple of red flags with the IRS. So if you have a transaction that falls under one of these categories, you are going to report that transaction on this form that you see right here, which is referred to as IRS Form 8300. You must file IRS Form 8300 by the 15th day after the date that the cash was received. If that date falls on a Saturday, Sunday, or a legal holiday, you may file the form on the next business day. You've got to furnish a correct taxpayer identification number of the person or persons from who you've received that payment, and if applicable, the person or person whose behalf the transaction was conducted. So, you may be subject to penalties for incorrect or missing taxpayer identification number. So for an individual, that could actually be the Social Security number. But for other persons, including maybe corporations or partnerships or estates, then that would be an employment identification number. If you're not able to obtain a taxpayer identification number for one or more of the parties to the transaction within 15 days, then you would have to file a report with an attached statement explaining exactly why the taxpayer identification number was not received. So IRS Form 8300 must also be filed for any suspicious transactions, even if the total does not exceed $10,000. So let's say, for example, I come into your dealership and I ask you, how do you report cash here? Well, to me, that's suspicious activity. So you could go ahead and wait for that customer to leave and then go ahead and fill out the IRS form as well. And on the back of that form, when you download that, you'll see mailing addresses. You'll also realize that the IRS does have an online version that you can use, so you can actually submit it online as well. And most dealer management softwares that you use will print this up automatically and also allow you to have it printed and sent to the customer when you enter the payment type. So you must give written or electronic statement to each person named on Form 8300 on or before January 31st of the year following the calendar year in which the cash was received. So do please keep this in mind. Remember, you're going to fill this out or submit it electronically every single time a person is paid with more than $10,000 in cash, or if they brought in a combination of cashier's check, money order, bank draft, or traveler's checks that total more than $10,000. So remember, we have to give notification to the customer before January 31st of the following year. All these transactions must be reported to the IRS within 15 days. And once again, this is another federal form, so you want to make sure that you're keeping copies of all of your federal documents for a minimum of 5 years. Let's do our unit review. In this unit, we have learned that the Federal Trade Commission Buyer's Guide must be displayed on most vehicles. The Federal Trade Commission must be notified of all identity theft attempts. You must have a written policy describing how identity theft is reported to the Federal Trade Commission. The Driver Privacy Protection Act protects driver privacy. The Uniform Commercial Code is a set of rules that have been adopted by most states. The United States Patriot Act prevents acts of terrorism against the United States. You must run an Office of Foreign Asset Control specially designated nationalist database search on every transaction. The National Motor Vehicle Title Information System stores title data. And remember, certain transactions must be reported on IRS Form 8300. We've now completed this unit, and I want to remind you that you can review any of these training units that you've completed at TexasDealers.com. Once again, that's TexasDealers.com, and just click on the Texas Dealer Videos link to review at any time after the course.